this meeting's presentation documents, please access Board Docs. The link to the Board Docs website can be found via the D38 website at lewispalmer.org on the Board of Education meetings webpage. To view the live stream video of this meeting, please go to the Lewis Palmer School District 38 YouTube page. Ms. Wood, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Clausen?
Here.
Ms. Phillips?
Here.
Mr. Schwartz?
Here.
Ms. Upchurch?
Here.
And Mr. Taylor is absent and excused this evening.
Ms. Upchurch, would you be willing to lead the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes, ma'am.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, I would like to recommend that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Ms. Wood?
Mr. Clausen?
Aye.
Ms. Phillips?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch?
Aye.
And we would like to begin our meeting with a community recognition. We have representatives from American Furniture Warehouse here. And American Furniture Warehouse has been a longstanding partner of Lewis Palmer School District, and through the community's patronage of AFW, they have in turn made substantial financial donations back to the district. And recently donated $3,627 to D38 as part of their school partnership program. So Mr. Tim Tassone, would you please join us? And I'm not sure if Eric Vigil is here. Okay, come on up.
American Furniture really appreciates the Lewis Palmer School District. Let me first say that your patronage is what makes this work. So, in reciprocation of your support, we just want to help, and we appreciate it. Again, the program is an annual rewards program. Anytime anybody comes in and mentions either any one of your schools in your district or Lewis Palmer School District, we donate 2% back of that net purchase before taxes and delivery, sometimes 4%, depends on the merchandise. We match an additional 2% on anything Beauty Rest, Simmons, Serta mattresses. This last donation, $3,000 plus, is I think collectively over the past few years we've had the partnership, we've donated over $21,000. The next donation's already over $1,000. So we appreciate your community, and we simply want to reciprocate, like I mentioned, that support back to you. So with that said, I wanted to acknowledge a special individual tonight, Eric. I hadn't heard Eric Vigil, he's kind of my school manager liaison out of the Colorado Springs store. I work out of the Compark office here in Inglewood, but Eric in the Colorado Springs store is really responsible for about 95% of the support. And certainly we get a lot of deliveries coming from our Inglewood area, but we'll keep coming, and we certainly want to continue to give back. So thank you so much for your support.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, the board will hear comments from the public. Per board policy BEDH, public participation at school board meetings, all regular and special meetings of the board shall be open to the public. Because the board desires to hear the viewpoints of all citizens throughout the district and also needs to conduct its business in an orderly and efficient manner, it shall schedule time during some board meetings for brief comments from residents and property owners. There is one time for public comment, and it is limited to 30 minutes. In an effort to allow all who wish to speak, the amount of time dedicated to each speaker will be dependent on the number of people who sign up. with the entire public comment period not exceeding 30 minutes. If 10 people or fewer sign up, each person will have 3 minutes to address the board. The sign-up sheet for public comments was available at 5 p.m. in the Learning Center meeting room. The board respects the rights of the public to speak on matters concerning the operation of the schools. We believe that public comments that are critical of district staff, however, often cause unnecessary harm to those employees and to the education of our students. As a result, we prefer that members of the public share any criticisms of employees in writing with the superintendent, who is responsible for supervising all staff, and then involving the board as necessary. If you choose instead to address a personnel issue publicly, please understand that the board does not endorse the comments of any speaker and reminds all who speak that they assume the risk of legal action by district employees in the event the affected employees believe that any comments about them violate legal standards. In addition, speakers may be asked to appoint a spokesperson if the topic is of a group concern. Lastly, please keep in mind we may have K through 12 students in our audience. Please keep all comments appropriate. With that, it looks like we have 4 people who would like to make a public comment, and the first is Stephen Walsh, a parent.
Hi, good evening. I applaud the students that presented to the board at the last meeting, but I am voicing my concerns regarding the No Place for Hate program in our schools. The program is based on flowery platitudes that deliver empty results. Contained on the No Place for Hate website, the mission statement includes raising a new generation of social activists. This is not the program for our schools. If we indoctrinate our children to search for oppression and racism in every interaction and situation, then it will be found even if none truly exist. The program is based on empty platitudes and creates a continuous victim and oppressor mentality that causes increased situations where students feel they need to personally intervene when a perceived oppressor, creating a self-reinforcing mentality. What happens when a student is falsely accused based solely on hyper-focused attention? In an exercise facilitated by the students, one example provided was a black student was being questioned about being in the right class. This scenario implies that based on skin color alone, the student wasn't qualified. This is absolutely ludicrous. Did this specific situation occur in LPMS, or was it an anecdote presented in a national handbook based on false pretenses and missing context? Recent examples in media have shown that situations are intentionally delivered through a race-based lens, driving further division where there doesn't need to be any. There were many other examples presented, but due to time constraints, I will not discuss them now. Also, a school that implements the program must cede significant power over day-to-day operations to the hyperpartisan national activist group that sponsors it, the Anti-Defamation League. Schools are expected to notify the ADL when any incident of bias, bullying, discrimination, or harassment occurs, and work with it to address them or risk revocation of its No Place for Hate designation, according to the program's handbook. We do not need the ADL to be involved in the day-to-day operations of our D38 schools. The program rightly strives for harmony and respect for all, but is this the best way to achieve those goals, to keep kids hyper-focused on their differences, instruct that these differences determine their identity, and suggest that their identity dictates whether they're a member of a dominant or a victim group? The message directly contradicts judging someone by the content of their character. We can agree with many of the program's ends, such as harmony, bravery, and eradicating racism. We agree on the words, but we're using different dictionaries. We agree that everyone should be treated with dignity and respect, but we should ask whether the current means are the best way to achieve those ends. There are programs available that accomplish the admirable goals and are more desirable, but No Place for Hate should not be one of them. Thank you.
Next, we have Kim Walsh.
Good evening. Once again, I want to thank you guys for all that you do. We're so thankful for you and everything you've done and continue to do. I'm also speaking tonight because I'm very concerned about the No Place for Hate presentation that was given at the last board meeting. We are so proud of the kids who are wanting to make the school a better place. However, No Place for Hate curriculum is developed by the ADL, which is known to be a highly partisan, politicized group. One concern is that the ADL requires schools to have 70% of the students sign a pledge in order to become a designated No Place for Hate school. The question then is, are students being coerced in any way to reach this goal? If a child chooses not to sign, are they labeled as a bad person? Once the school becomes a designated No Place for Hate school, the school is required to report all incidents to the ADL. Do we want a group like this to have this kind of access to our school? We fully support the intentions of the club to teach kindness and compassion for all people, but we don't feel that this is the right program for our school to be involved with. I understand that this group is an after-school club, but in order to achieve 70% compliance, it's unreasonable to think that this does not bleed over to the classroom setting, violating the policy that was approved by the board on November 15th. In addition, I feel that the statements that were read by the board during the kids' exercise were completely inappropriate for this age group, and the board was obviously uncomfortable reading them. A board member rightly stated after the exercise that we see what we look for. Are we teaching our kids to look for and focus on our differences versus things that unite us? This program is also hyper-focused on gender fluidity. Teaching gender fluidity is not appropriate for 7th and 8th graders and is a subject that should be left to parents. Also, several kids in the club identified the reason for joining the club due to the issue of bullying in our middle school. We'd like to know if this is in fact a problem at the middle school. We have a child going into 7th grade next year, and this is very concerning. I would like for the school to reevaluate if this is truly the best way to teach kindness and compassion for all. I appreciate your time and attention to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Kimberly Drozdic, pardon the pronunciation if I was incorrect.
I want to start out and say thank you for your service on this board, and of course being advocates for our children in all areas. As a professional with a master's in counseling and the work I have done with children in the Chicago public system, I have seen firsthand how creating division and hyper-focusing on negative ideologies greatly affects our children's positive outlook on life and our overall well-being. This is why I am here tonight. I too am speaking against No Place for Hate in our schools. And that is what was brought last board meeting, and it came to light. I am not in support of this curriculum. No Place for Hate sounds on the surface good, but if one starts to look deeper, it is exactly the opposite. I am sure we know the difference between the straw man argument and the Socratic debate. A straw man is a false argument that distorts an opposing stance in order to make it easier to attack. Socratic is evidence-based and typically takes emotion out of the equation to get to the facts. Through the ADL curriculum, the kids are given a straw man argument based on emotion and are not necessarily given evidence to back up the issues at hand. Kids are young and impressionable, and the lessons of perceived bias, bullying, etc. is simply based on emotion, which keeps things confusing, and the topics will never be solved but perpetually talked about in circles. The ADL is out of business if there is no racism or division. Found from their own website, my issues start with the program's requirements. It says it has to have 70 to 75% of children to sign a pledge. Why do they have to sign? What happens if they don't? What about kids who decide they don't want to be a part of the group? From the website, they tell teachers and administrators to put the pledges up in a prominent place so all can remember their pledge. How is this not bullying itself? They also promote hyper-awareness to find differences in each other and then tell students to detect bullying biases and etc. to set these activities. The schools must participate in these activities to keep the designation, and these make me uncomfortable as an adult. Sorry, I lost my place. So how is this appropriate for our children who are impressionable and still learning how to take part in a society that keeps telling them there is something wrong with them instead of focusing on their unique and God-given talents and differences that make them so special? I won't go into it, but I ask you to reference the ADL website, please. While schools should be a safe place to learn and not tolerate bullying or biases, giving power to an outside activist group seems not only dangerous, but gives away a parent's right to have a say in their children's education and activities, as well as understand what is happening in their school. Our schools know the students and community, and for a group like ADL to have the power to hand down punishments or rulings is beyond comprehension. Schools also have to reapply every year to fit with the ADL's statements to move toward, quote, universal consciousness. What happened to teaching children how to think critically instead of what to think? What happened to individual thought and capitalizing on our strengths instead of constantly comparing ourselves to others? By making kids participate in set activities, that teach how to look for division and differences. We are
Kimberly,
setting kids up.
thank you. I'm sorry.
I'm almost done. There's only 4 of us. If
You're
I could
actually
finish,
over
please.
the 3-minute limit. I'm sorry.
Finally, the curriculum sets forth does teach white children that the cycle of inequality starts with them, that racism means disrespect, harm, and mistreatment of people of color on the ideas that white people deserve to be in charge and treated better. That is not our society. Sounds like CRT to me.
Thank you.
How is this
You're-
not a bias?
You're well over
I
the
have a
3-minute.
couple more,
I know.
30 minutes,
I'm
please.
sorry. We have a policy we're adhering to.
I want to finish. May I please finish, board? I appreciate it. I have 2 more small paragraphs.
We have 1 more comment, so I'll let you finish.
I
Thank you.
appreciate that. Thank you. How is this not a bias in pointing blame to children who had no choice in what color of skin they were born with? How does this not set up guilt, division, and shame? How does this not create a division of perpetrators and victims? Who bought into this, into our district, and how do I, as a parent, get to have a say in what is brought into our schools? Why can't we stick to teaching our kids valuable skills like reading, writing, and math, and leave the social constructs up to the families and communities? When they took God out of the equation, we definitely started to see a decline. I thank you very much.
Miranda Willoughby, and I would just request that you please stick as close to 3 minutes as possible. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for taking your time to listen to your constituents. At the end of the day, I believe that freedom of choice for ourselves is what the country was founded on. We seem to have veered from a freedom-loving country to one where many feel the need to control others. We are not given a life free of illness or diseases, but rather a beautiful chance to make our lives our own. So many factors go into health, but none of the important ones are talked about. Why is this? I want to thank you all for believing in freedom and having a school board that understands life is made of choices. Our choices belong to no one but ourselves. What is injected or goes into our bodies is one of the more personal decisions, as well as what you wear on your face. And I just want to say I appreciate everybody for allowing personal choice in this board meeting. I want you to remember that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are inalienable rights given to all of us in the United States. So thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to board member comments, and I'll just start at the end of the line there. Mr. Clausen?
Thank you. As always, I sincerely appreciate hearing from our constituents. There's always a lot of good information and so forth, so thank you for being here. Want to thank our teachers for another great semester, mask-free. And also want to thank all of our administrative team for everything that they've done to wrap this semester up. So that's all I have, Ms. Phillips.
Thank you. Mr. Schwartz?
Thanks. I'd actually like to change it up a little bit this time and ask my teammates for some help. We talk a lot about what's going on in the schools, but we don't spend any time on the why behind why we're here. So I just thought it'd be interesting to ask each of my teammates why you really do this, why you put in the nights and the weekends, and what drives you to do it. So is it okay if we start with you, Mr. Clausen?
Absolutely.
1 sentence or less, by the way. We have 3 minutes.
He knows that I'm the attorney. It's all about the kids. Everything we do is about what's in the best interest of our kids.
Great, thanks. Ms. Upchurch?
I can rarely do 1 sentence or less.
You have to dig in deep.
My heart has been called to service in the most important part of our society, which is education. And I do that in hopes that I can help make a difference in even just one child's life by instilling an environment where we actively work to ensure we're reaching and teaching each child, that we are supporting quality teachers, and that we're advocating for collaborative relationships where all stakeholders are welcome to participate in ensuring that we continue to be a high-performing district.
Thank you.
Told you I couldn't do 1 sentence.
You were close. Ms. Phillips?
It had a lot of commas.
You sound like an attorney.
Oh, gosh. For those of, we didn't know this was coming, by the way. So I would say that the reason I serve is because I was very well served by a public school district growing up myself. And that when I became a parent, I saw what public school provided for my own kids. They were very, very well served by District 38, among others. And I would say if I had to boil it down with a final clause, we as parents want to give back to the community as best we can, and ultimately I care. I care about this community, and I care about our kids, and I care about our school system.
Thank you. Dr. Summers? One sentence, sir.
To whom much is given, much is required. I was given a lot by those that invested into me as I was growing up, and to give back in much the same way as all of you have described. There is no greater reward, and the challenges are significant, and so are the opportunities to make a positive difference in the lives, I should say, of all of our kids, but also all of our adults. So it's my pleasure to serve in that capacity.
Thank you.
Mr. Schwartz, if I may lob you, or
For you?
lob it back to you.
You're returning the favor, aren't you?
Yes, I'm returning the favor. Could you please answer the question?
Yeah, for me, it's a little personal, but it really is the child of immigrants. I have a deep love and appreciation for our country and what it stands for. So if I can do something, I know the next set of Americans hold our future in their hands, and if I can do something to have an impact on 6,000 or 7,000 kids, then I think they will have an impact on 60 or 70,000, and they'll tell someone, and so on and so forth. So the teaching community sees so many waking hours of these kids. It is so important that we get this right, that it's an honor for me, and if I can have a little bit of influence, I'm all in. So thank you.
Ms. Upchurch, do you have any further board comments?
Yeah. First and foremost, as I've been reflecting on the peace and the hope and the joy and the love this Christmas and the reason for the season, I wanted to start by saying that I know what it's like to be afraid and discouraged to share personal testimony. So I applaud and I appreciate when any student or individual has the courage to speak with their voice, their heart, and their mind. Each of us has a different journey and a different experiences and circumstances that form the character that we are to be judged by. As my eldest son, who's now 22, once said at the age of 10 years old during a speech he gave in front of thousands of people in a stadium during an Autism Speaks walk, in front of many people who don't know his journey, who don't know who he is, what it's like to live with autism, or may not possibly be able to, but are often quick to see a small snippet of a person instead of the whole person. And this was his wise words. I'm going to share them. He said, "I am just one person. I may be a little different, but aren't we all? Take time to recognize that we don't all see life's lights through the same prisms or lenses, but we're all human, being worthy to be treated with dignity." And so I was thinking about that this Christmas as Tommy's about to come home for Christmas. And I want to reiterate my stance that I will always advocate for local control and a parent's right to be a parent and choice. And I personally appreciate that we have a community of diverse voices willing and eager to engage and advocate on behalf of our students and your students and our families, staff, and taxpayers, especially our students' voices. In Colorado, local control means that boards adopt curriculum and textbooks, but the State Board of Education adopts academic standards that all public schools and charter schools have to meet or exceed. And so I want to encourage everybody to reach out to the State Board of Education because the revision of the K-12 social studies curriculum is currently under review. January 1st is the deadline. There's been a commission that comes together. It was assembled based on laws during 2019. So they prepared a draft of the revisions, and it's being prepared. It's about 74 pages. It's implements several different House bills, but I strongly encourage each of us, each of you, to reach out to the Colorado State Board of Education to hear from local parents and local educators and local school board members and local teachers. And the deadline for that public comment is January 1st, and the State Board of Education will ultimately vote on those standards. And if you'd like more information or how to make comments, you can please visit the Colorado Association of Department of Education, and on that website there's a tab called Colorado Academic Standards Review and Revision webpage. And there's an instructional video on that guides you through how to do public comment. So I would encourage everybody to also use your voice at the state level. And Merry Christmas.
Thanks, Tiffany. I don't have as much to say.
Sorry.
But I would say, I think it was 2 months ago that I mentioned something that I've thought quite deeply about this fall, which is that we're all hardwired for connection. And there's actually quite a lot of scientific research for that now. And I think that's what a lot of the community is seeking in many different ways, whether it's students with teachers or parents with administrators, or in any number of relationships. Everybody's trying to connect in ways that are meaningful and thoughtful, and where we can align values. And so I so appreciate the community engagement. And I also recognize that very much so this fall in our students, and how much they've needed that reconnection with in-person school, and how important that's been. And so I just applaud our superintendent for the way that you've navigated some really tough challenges at times, and that we are not through to the end of anything yet, but we are still stubbornly optimistic as we move forward. And I think it's also the break, I can tell in my own household, is coming at a wonderful time. So I hope that everybody finds really meaningful connections in lots of different family ways, and friendship. And I have had the pleasure of going back to perform live again, and having those live concerts and places to interact with people beyond our own smaller circles, has made me view humanity in an even better way probably than I had before. So I also wanted to just mention that a number of us were at the CASB, Colorado Association of School Board Conference. Lots of great takeaways from there. I actually haven't had a chance to condense mine down yet. Mr. Taylor was there with Ms. Upchurch and myself. And we actually, as a district, had a chance to give a presentation as well in a breakout session, which was very well received. I think that Casey's going to touch on that. And also, I had the very unique opportunity to participate in a workshop that was given for the staff and teachers here this past week. And it was just a reminder of some of the unique, I don't know if you would consider it cutting edge, but just some new things that we are. We have a superintendent leading who is not leaning back; he's leaning forward, and really wanting to take care of your staff. And I really appreciate that, watching you interact with your administrators and staff this past week. So, thank you for allowing us as board members to participate in that. And with that, I would just wish everybody a very warm season.
Thank you. I can't promise this will be 3 minutes, but I do have a PowerPoint to keep me on track. Are you timing me, Mr. Schwartz? So as we're setting that up, just appreciation for the comments of our board as well as the public comments earlier, and huge appreciation to all of our staff and families and those that make what we do possible each and every day. And a big congratulations to our kids. I know to see the light at the end of the semester, including the middle of finals for our high school students, and lots of different festivities over the next few days. It's thrilling every time you have an opportunity to witness that and to celebrate that. So thank you to a board that is really motivated to stay close to all that work. So I'm going to dive into December's update. So we'll start with priority 1, and that will take us to an update around Panorama Student Climate Survey, which was conducted before Thanksgiving break. We had a 74.6% response rate for our grades 3 through 6 students and a 58.3% response rate for our secondary level. And we're looking forward to sharing these more detailed results with you all in the January work session. Something that we want to at least bring to light in this meeting, and then we'll be sending more of this information out so all of our community is aware. As we know, mental health continues to be a dynamic that we are really invested in terms of both identification and supports. And there is a new support that is being afforded at the state level. So the program is called I Matter, and this is a program that provides up to 3 free counseling sessions for any Colorado youth. So currently statewide, there have been 700 counseling appointments scheduled or completed as of November 18th. So what happens is if you go to that website, youth and their parents can visit that platform. They take a confidential survey and they can schedule free sessions with a licensed behavioral health clinician. So that's just a resource that we wanted to make sure was talked about or shared in the community for those that are interested. And then lastly, as we think about where we are going into the break, as well as how we come back into second semester, there is updated guidance provided by El Paso County Public Health that will go into effect as of December 18th. So you'll note that is officially following the end of first semester for all districts in the area. There will be, as part of that guidance, a continued emphasis on the isolation of COVID positive individuals, as well as a recognition of the importance of targeted quarantines and required outbreak reporting. But perhaps the most significant change is that those kind of typical quarantine type situations, whether you find them in a classroom or potentially in other areas of the day, are not automatically required. They are still part of an investigative process. So in the most high risk or extreme situations, they may be still implemented. However, it's nice to see that the county is also hearing a lot of feedback from the schools, because this was not just guidance that emerged from their point of view as much as it was continued collaboration with multiple districts. So you may hear of other districts in the region that are also in a position similar to us as we're pushing back. To that point, here are updated numbers as of this last Friday. And you can see both the current count as well as the total from the beginning of the school year. As a reminder, this includes both staff and students. Moving on, priority 2. As we've done every month so far this school year, we took a district leadership team visit, this time to Lewis Palmer High School. This was Wednesday, December 1st. Had a really neat experience in the way that we were focusing on instructional rounds, which is a unique way for how classrooms are being observed, really through the lens of the teacher. And it's really neat to see how that's not only taking place within these administrative contexts, but there is a renewed emphasis in terms of how this is rolling out for teachers, so that peers have the opportunity to observe each other, to offer feedback as well as reflection. And we got to see, as we've heard so often from Lewis Palmer High School, a very clear and aligned focus on their strategic plan implementation. So just a lot of celebration and appreciation for the work that's happening with Lewis Palmer High School staff. As I mentioned, I believe briefly during the work session, this was November 30th, we were granted the early literacy grant through the state, and so we are in the process of submitting revisions to the grant oversight committee, and what this will total for us is $740,000 over 4 years beginning in this academic school year. So these funds are going to support new curriculum and training for preschool teachers, which also includes continued training and support for K-5 literacy adoption, as well as the purchase of reading intervention materials in our secondary grades. So a lot of exciting things happening with that grant. Big hats off to Pam Kern and other members of the Learning Services team. And in addition to some of that work, we are excited to share some next steps on the profile of a graduate. If you recall, we talked about this way back at the beginning of the year, and Jess McAllister, along with some student interns, have been leading this work, including stakeholder interviews and feedback that's been collected. So we're looking forward to sharing that update with you, ideally in January, and we'll continue that as we work on both cementing the profile and implementing. For priority 3, so there's a bit of good news that we received from our group insurance provider, which is CEBT. So anytime you hear the word dividend, that's nice bells that are ringing. And what this is going to allow us to do, and this is something that we are going to circulate with staff here very shortly, is for employees that specifically medical, dental, and vision, they will have a reprieve from those deductions in their December and January paychecks. So that's just a nice recognition for them. It's also a function of a really good partnership with our group insurance provider. So big shout out there. And then, as was mentioned, Ms. Phillips, the specific experience I think you're referring to is referred to as evolved vocology. So this occurred last week. We had 26 participants that were trained over a 2-day period, Monday into Tuesday. And then something that was, I think, very well received were the individual follow-up sessions to the individuals who were trained at their specific school locations and within their classrooms and in some different ways. So we're still in the process of collecting feedback from all of our participants, but essentially this gave us the opportunity to learn both the art and the science of how we use our breath as well as our voice. And we would describe it as both immersive, interactive, innovative, and perhaps some other great adjectives as well. Just a big shout out to the trainers themselves, Johannes and Tessa, as well as to all the folks that made this possible. So we're excited to see how this will be implemented, learning about how it is impacting not only our staff, but of course our students, and looking forward to sharing more of those takeaways as we're going forward. Priority 4. So we are happy to announce a financial advisory committee has been selected. We have a 14-member committee, which includes staff, parents, and other community members, and we are looking toward planning our first meeting launch for January 2022. I'll pause for a quick moment because Mr. Schwartz is one of the facilitators of this group. Anything that you'd like to add?
I guess the only thing I'd add is heartfelt thanks to those that volunteered. If folks in the audience or watching or listening know somebody, please let them know that it matters, and we are going to go into some pretty meaty things, and we're looking for innovation. So having a nice cross-section of the community and the various constituents will be really helpful. And ironically, it used to be called the Financial Audit Committee, and we took a look at that and said, you know, we've got an auditor. We pay him a bunch of money, do a decent job. Why do we need the citizens to do this? Why don't we have them help us innovate? So we're really excited to kick this off and show results.
And you responded well for me putting you on the spot, so thank you.
Under 3 minutes, but more than one sentence.
Yeah,
so
nice
50-50.
job. And moving right along, we are in the process of working on submitting our preliminary plan for ESSER 3, which is due this week. So all the feedback that was received from our survey and additional conversations have really helped inform what the scope of that budget and the application will look like. So thank you there. And then lastly, I just wanted to make a comment about our upcoming January meeting, where we'll also do work in regards to our budget adjustments for this particular school year. So obviously we'll have more of those details at that upcoming meeting. I know one of the questions that we've received through our staff compensation updates is, are we in a position to do something similar to what we did last year around the same time of the year in terms of a one-time compensation action? And what I can say without going into a lot of detail is, unfortunately, there wasn't low-hanging fruit that had appeared to be able to make that call as early as November or December. We're still highly motivated to see what we may be able to find and leverage in terms of some additional compensation adjustments as we're working through this continued fiscal year. So more information to come on that topic. And then we will have a Priority 5 update in more detail that Mark Belcher will be presenting to us this evening. Just also wanted to highlight the news.lewispalmer.org site, where we have 10 news stories posted since our last Board of Education meeting. And then, as you, I think, have grown accustomed to, hopefully our community has as well, we will have a monthly board meeting newsletter that will be distributed this week following this meeting. So that received several views in November. Just a big shout out to Mark and all his efforts in the communications department overall in terms of how we're working to share that information. And then just a few additional noteworthy updates. So we were able to confirm in our efforts around Harvest of Love campaign that with Monument Academy's portion as well as our portion within our D38 schools, we raised more than $10,000 and more than 16,000 pounds of food that were able to benefit those individuals that are receiving supports at Tri-Lakes Cares. So we're extremely grateful for all of those donations and that unified community support. That's just fantastic. I believe that is a record, if I'm not mistaken. But if I say that, yes, worthy of applause for sure. And Max Williams will correct me later if I'm wrong. We also just had a fantastic showing at our recent DECA competition where we had more than 50 students in District 38 who are moving on to the state level for competition. Quick side note to that is we received quite a few both formal and informal accolades in the way that our students performed admirably in the regional competition. So that just, I think, speaks volumes for not only the kids, but the advisors and everyone that's supporting them. So just huge shout out there. Absolutely. As well as, of course, we're accustomed to a lot of musical accolades and continued soaring through the fall semester. So we are pleased to present the Lewis Palmer High School Wind Symphony, which has been selected to perform for the Colorado Music Educator Awards Assembly, which will be in January. We also had 6 Palmer Ridge High School choir students that were selected to perform all-state. And then more than 50 D38 students, again, a nice number of 50, selected to perform in the all-city band. And unfortunately, these names are a little hard to read. They're white on the blue. However, this represents, again, the collective across both of our high schools in terms of that all-city honor band selection. So, again, just huge shout-outs all the way around. And I believe that wraps up this presentation, unless there's any questions that I can help address.
I would just add that there were 6 or 8 students who were selected for all-state orchestra, Philharmonic, and symphony level, wind players as well as string players.
Thank you for calling that out, and we'll be sure to make
It just came out
special
2 days
recognition
ago,
for them as well. Yes, thank you for that. All right.
With that, we can move on.
I think that brings us to our next item.
For those following along, we're now at agenda item C1.
Demographic study.
Did you want to introduce?
Okay, yes, I can say just a few words here as we welcome Shannon Bingham from Western Demographics. He is going to present a current demographic study, including some information regarding census and land development in the Tri-Lakes area, and how we consider that impact. And Shannon, I believe it's been, gosh, was it April 2020? Does that sound right to you, the last time that you were here? So it's good to welcome you back, and thanks for your efforts in preparing this information for us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you don't mind speaking into the mic that is next to you, that'll help us stay on track with our stream. And thanks again for being here.
Great. Thank you very much. You're most welcome. It's a privilege to be here. My name is Shannon Bingham. I own Western Demographics. I have worked with the district off and on the last 5 or 6 years, maybe longer, maybe something like that. I have recently conducted a demographic update, a director district reapportionment, and a cash in lieu of land dedication analysis for the district. So I feel like I'm pretty up to speed on what's happening in the community. We are growing very rapidly. I think the next 60 months will probably be the heyday of growth in the Lewis Palmer School District. I think a lot of new homes will be built. I'm forecasting a little over 300 homes per year for the next 5 years, and I think that point of view is shared by the city, that we'll be looking at a lot of developers wanting to build available lots that they have, and developments that have been discussed for quite some time, I think will be realized short of some other catastrophe which has affected us in the past. From a historical standpoint, most of the districts in the state of Colorado lost about 3% of their enrollment due to the pandemic, and we lost students as well. This is a historical trend line that shows our K through 6th grade enrollment declining a bit right in the midst of the pandemic. Our high school enrollment holding steady or rising a little bit, and our middle school enrollment in grades 7 and 8 staying more or less flat. As far as over time, we've grown by about 1.5%, and you can't really see those numbers on the right up there, but during the pandemic, we lost about 1.5%, I think, in 2019. We lost about 2% of our enrollment, and in 2020, we lost about 3% of our enrollment. And in 2021, we got back about 1.5% of it. That's pretty consistent with what has happened around the state. So, for example, most of the districts on average lost a little over 3%. Some of the districts on the western slope and in isolated areas lost as many as 9 or 10% of their total enrollment as a result of the pandemic. We had a meeting around probably January of 2021 with CASBO, I think, and we were trying to guess how many kids would come back. And a lot of us were estimating that about 2/3 of those students would come back, and then in the following school year, the remaining 1/3 would come back. And what has happened is that has largely been what has happened in the first year, meaning about 65% of the lost enrollment recovered. But the second year did not really show any enrollment recovery statewide. The other thing that we have seen is that a lot of districts that lost enrollment lost it for good. We're not really forecasting that children that we have lost as a result of the pandemic will return. So for example, in Douglas County and Cherry Creek, we lost a pretty significant number of children that we aren't forecasting to come back into our enrollment numbers. Yes, sir.
Do you have any data points on those deltas across the years, specifically as it relates to the pandemic, in states outside of Colorado and other developed countries? The rationale behind this is obviously our students don't just compete with other students and graduates in Colorado, but nationally and ultimately globally.
That's true. I have some data for Washington State and some data for Canada. I haven't done much research beyond that, but I also work for school districts in Washington State as well that have lost 3 to 5%, and we're not really seeing those children return. As far as where they're going, that's what we're kind of pressing CDE and other data providers to try to help us understand. Did they try online education and decide they liked it? And so we had maybe 10% of natural progression to kind of a space age instructional model happen in a 12-month period. A lot of people that are watching enrollment believe that's what's happened, and that a lot of children are out there in some sort of an online environment now, and a lot of that movement was compressed. From a competitive standpoint, I don't know where children would have gone. We're not seeing big chunks of kids who have rematerialized in Texas or Nebraska. What we are seeing is that a lot of families are refugees from Colorado housing costs into adjacent states. So we're seeing student generation remaining strong in Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, other states that have historically lower housing costs than Colorado. And so that's one thing that we are seeing, is that those areas were not hit as hard by the pandemic because of their fundamental housing cost base. I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but pretty much the only data I have is Colorado, Washington State, a little bit of Oregon data, and then some data in British Columbia, where we've also lost children permanently to online education providers.
Thank you. Maybe a request I could make, since we're working hard not to purely compare ourselves in state anymore.
Absolutely.
From a practical standpoint, because that's ultimately whom our graduates compete with and against. Would it be possible for the next time
Sure.
that you do a little bit of research and let us know how we're doing in the spirit of providing world-class education demographically? And the other thing I might ask is if there's validity to this theory about housing cost deltas between here and some neighboring states, then that validity likely transcends to higher cost states outside of Colorado as well, right? So Idaho, for example, is getting a lot of folks from California. Are we seeing any of that dynamic? Would be something that I would ask you to maybe, if it's appropriate, to validate at the next session versus me putting you on the spot and speculating, which is not my intent.
Anecdotally, I think your hypotheses are what I'm seeing anecdotally. I'm seeing children leaving California. I'm seeing children leaving more affluent parts of the Puget Sound region, moving into other parts of Washington State and into other labor markets. I'm seeing children leaving the Portland metro area, and a lot of it has to do with housing cost. Salt Lake, I can't say. I haven't been monitoring that closely, but I think that the fundamental hypothesis of the data that you're asking for is what I'm seeing anecdotally on the ground.
Yeah, and if we look at housing costs, we might want to look at tax structure too. It appears at least on a cursory look that might have an impact as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
So as far as what we're looking at is our change factors have been very much focused on loss at the elementary level. So we're seeing that we lost students during the pandemic pretty significantly, especially in the 2019-2020 school year. And then in 2021, we started to recover a little bit. From a birth standpoint, we are more or less at an all-time high. These are babies that were born with Lewis Palmer School District 38 addresses. So these are basically every mom when she had a baby, regardless of the hospital where the child was born, whether the child was born in Miami, if they have a Monument address or a Lewis Palmer 38 address, they were included in this data, and you can see that we're at that all-time high of 265 babies. So we're beginning to see a little bit of a reversal of Lewis Palmer being more of a high school district to Lewis Palmer being more of a balanced district. And a lot of the housing that's being proposed for this 60-month period that I'm alerting you to is actually pretty attractively priced for families with children in grades K through 8. So I think we're going to see a little bit of a reversal in some of our past trends, where in the past we tended to attract children that were middle or high school age, and I think that's going to change a little bit. Bear Creek Elementary is kind of ground zero for this. You've seen that we had a little bit of a dip 2012 through 2015 or 2011 through 2014, and now we've recovered back into roughly having about 110 babies born each year in that geographic area that corresponds with Bear Creek. Now, simultaneously, between 2010 and 2020, Monument grew by 49%. So, and 23% of every person that moves into the district is school aged. So a lot of this has to do with natural influx. But I think we've got kind of a little bit of a pent up situation where housing cost has kind of affected the basic profile of people that move to Monument, and I think we're about to see a little bit of a change in that regard. Conversely, you can see Prairie Winds and Palmer Lake Elementary geographic areas continue to be pretty flat. Prairie Winds has declined a little bit recently from a period when there was a lot of new housing built in that Woodmore area, and now it's kind of down to kind of an all-time low of 9 babies born in that area. So I think we're seeing that really settle out to be being a lot of those children have moved into older grades. You can see Lewis Palmer Elementary continues to grow. There's a development there called The Beach by Campbell Homes that's not on the map I'm about to show you, but it's producing homes as well. There have been small subdivisions in the Lewis Palmer Elementary attendance area over the last 5 to 8 years that have continued to produce children and have kind of bolstered that growth rate. And then Kilmer, you're seeing ascendance of the Sanctuary Point development, which is elevating the birth rate in that area. And we have actually assigned that entire attendance, that entire subdivision to Kilmer. So the children from that neighborhood actually attend Kilmer by assignment, unless they choose to go to Monument Academy or elsewhere. Our birth to kindergarten correlation continues to be about 0.59, meaning that every year we have about 450 kindergarten kids, but only about 265 children are born here. So basically, we have an influx of children for the elementary age range that weren't born here. So that really demonstrates that we're not really a community that has a lot of super young families, but once children become school age, we tend to accumulate them for elementary school. This map I wish could be bigger for the audience's benefit, but it really shows most of the developments in the district with the exception of the Beach by Campbell Homes, which is in the enrollment numbers but not on this map for some reason. The Beach, Jackson Creek North, Willow Springs by D.R. Horton is just getting started. And there's just a lot going on in the district, and it seems to be almost all concentrated in the Bear Creek attendance area, which is going to continue to be a problem for us. I think Bear Creek is one of the 3 largest elementary schools in the state. And as these numbers continue to accumulate, this new housing continues to build, I really believe that Bear Creek might wind up being maybe the largest neighborhood public school in the state. You can see Willow Springs, that's mostly going to be D.R. Horton. They tend to build their homes first and then sell them. The other developers are pre-selling, and right now the wait for a home is about 10 months, maybe a little bit more. You may drive around and see big loads of trusses sitting out in the street. There are all sorts of weird supply chain problems right now with appliances that are bought and paid for sitting on container ships in Long Beach Harbor. And so it's a real nervous time for builders. But what I'm seeing comprehensively in the building and developing community up and down the Front Range is a frenzied rush to build now. And I think that that is finally going to come home to Lewis Palmer School District over the next 60 months. I'm seeing that in Douglas County. I'm seeing it in Cherry Creek. I'm seeing it on the western slope. Housing prices are up about 30%. So it's remarkable that even with the price escalation since the pandemic, and I'm saying up 30% over where they were 24 months ago. So people are buying homes. There's a shortage of new housing, a lot of pent-up demand in the state of Colorado. And I think we're seeing this kind of unfreezing of the machinery it takes to build new housing kind of be unleashed simultaneous to a time when a lot of young families want a new home and a lot of young families can afford a new home. I have to say I've never seen this much new housing under construction in my 38-year career. I've never seen this many homes under construction at one time. Even back in the glory days of Briargate, when I was the planner of Academy 20, I never saw this many homes across the state under construction. Yes, sir.
How does what you're reporting on compare to national averages, percentage increases, quantity of homes being built in regions? And is ours particularly unique, right in line with everything that's happening around the country? And are there dynamics that are macro versus micro that are driving any of this? And if so, what are they?
I'm mostly a Colorado and Washington State and Alaska consultant, but I would have to say between the Denver, Colorado Springs market, the Tacoma, Seattle, Everett, Bellingham market, the Portland, Salem, Eugene market, those housing markets that I know quite a bit about, I would say those are incredibly robust and rapidly moving. I know Boise is actually really, really robust right now. I know Salt Lake is extremely robust. I know Greater Houston, Greater Austin, Greater San Antonio are all going nuts right now. I hear anecdotally that other communities around the country are moving very rapidly. Suburban Nashville, big parts of Central and Panhandle, Florida are moving very rapidly. As far as how do we compare, I think we're probably a top 5 housing market as a state, easily, if not top 3. And I think that it's a combination of pent-up demand, post-pandemic purchasing behavior, and a development community that feels maybe 8 years from now, housing will be too expensive for families to be able to afford it anymore. So I'm seeing some real interesting behaviors on the part of developers that are just trying to sell everything right now.
So it sounds like your answer is it's a national trend.
I think it is, yes.
Or at least west of the Mississippi.
At least west of the Mississippi, which is my territory.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
So I have a question to piggyback on that. So here in Monument, we're saying that our average house price is more than $500,000. Is that considered affordable housing right now?
It is, yeah.
Because I'm thinking of these younger families and the idea that that's affordable housing is
shocks me. I live in a Victorian dump that was built in 1907, and I got my assessment report from the county the other day and just about dropped my teeth on the sidewalk. It's valuation of homes is way different than it was 24 to 36 months ago. That's also true in Washington State. It's true in Oregon. It's true in significantly true in California. And I think that we're just in a different world now as far as what a house costs. I'm asking realtors and sales offices, do you really have young families coming in and buying these $680,000 houses? And they're saying, yes, we are. So I think financing is attractive right now. Interest rates are attractive. People are coming to Colorado with equity from California and elsewhere and are paying cash for homes. Especially in Sterling Ranch in Douglas County and South Central Castle Rock and Crystal Valley and a lot of these other big developments that are in Douglas County. People are just walking in and paying cash for these houses. So it's remarkable. I don't hear about as much of that here, but I think that we're still seeing expecting a very robust environment for the next 60 months. Naming some names. This table goes through some of the biggest subdivisions in the district, and that absorption schedule is based upon my interviewing various people that have a role in those subdivisions, interviewing people at the town of Monument, looking at what has historically happened in these areas, and applying an annual absorption to these properties. There are three at the bottom there. Just below Monument Ridge Apartments, which is over in the Jackson Creek Parkway corridor, there are two other big properties in that area that will be also predominantly attached homes, townhouses, and apartments with some single-family detached. They're early in the application process, so I can't really talk about them specifically, but those are big vacant parcels in the Jackson Creek Parkway corridor, and down there at the bottom line you see that adds up to about 350 homes a year for a 5-year period starting next year.
Are those the classic homes that are going in?
Some of them are. Classic, Campbell, and KB are probably arguably our three biggest builders, and so they tend to pick up a little share of everything. But again, those are pending developments that their applications aren't in yet. With all of that coming in, I do a lot of land dedication, fee in lieu of land dedication consulting up and down the state. And on average, most districts are getting about $2,000 per single family detached unit in order to collect money to purchase land for schools and to do various kind of short-term growth remediation. I have done that my entire career. When I first started at Academy 20 in December of 1985, the first thing I was asked to do was to update Academy's land dedication value with El Paso County. That was what was sitting on my desk. Tom Crawford, rest his soul, that was the first thing he asked me to do. So pretty much everybody up and down the Front Range who was growing is collecting between $2,000 and $2,500 per unit. And I have provided Dr. Summers an analysis that shows, based on local data, what should this district be collecting as all of the units that are on that table come in to help us buy appropriate school land in appropriate places as growth proceeds. Now, I've been around long enough to see school districts make horrible real estate decisions because they were trying to save money on buying a school site. I really believe that having an adequate kitty from which to purchase appropriate, well-located, well-served school land at the appropriate time is essential for school districts to make the right decision for buildings that are going to be around for 50 or 60 years. So I really think it's important for this district to have the same capacity that all of its peers have up and down the Front Range, and I provided Dr. Summers with a report that supports that outlook. The development community and the builders have almost universally supported these systems up and down the Front Range. As long as they're fair, they're consistently applied to the various subregions of the housing market, and there's no favoritism intentionally or unintentionally where a developer may have another development a mile away where that developer A pays fees and developer B in the adjacent district does not. So what they really want to see is that it's consistent. And I think that's one of the things that we've more or less achieved up and down the Front Range, is that we've been able to get to kind of a roughly equivalent number for what we collect in that regard. And given the magnitude of what's up there, I think that's about 2,200 units by 2029. That would be a significant resource for the district to use to buy school land.
Can I make a comment? I'm sorry to interrupt. We get our cash in lieu of is different from the town of Monument, Palmer Lake, and county. And I'm wondering, can we put that on a board work session to have a discussion on what D38, the advocacy power that D38 could have?
Yes. I'm just gonna keep it real simple. We are working on it right
Okay.
now. And we're getting close, is what I can say.
Shannon, another question, just
Sure.
point of clarification. In its simplest form, are you saying that if I look at this graph and I start with 2022 and each of the totals per school, so for example, take Bear Creek, I times that by 2,000 and that is revenues on a one-time basis that the district will be receiving?
Yes, sir.
Are you certain?
If you apply it among your multiple jurisdictions, that would be the fee that those units would pay as they come in at the building permit level, which is where it is charged 75% of the time.
So let's just unpack that one level deeper, please, to make sure
Sure.
we can plan. So let's go from the click to cash, okay? So home builder X pulls a permit to build a house somewhere in our jurisdiction, and that permit is approved on January 15th. When does the district receive $2,000?
Depends upon the IGA you write with the municipal government, but usually many cities will hold the money in trust for the district and accumulate it until the district chooses to purchase something. Other jurisdictions immediately turn around and put it in a school district account. They write the district a check. So it just depends upon the way that your IGA is written, and it varies from district to district depending upon the agreement between the town or council or county commission and the school district jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you. So, and for those who aren't familiar, IGA is intergovernmental agreement, I believe, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do we already have all this data in terms of a cash flow analysis based on assuming that it's credible, this projection?
When you say cash flow analysis, in what context?
For every $2,000 check or deposit that we're
What Shannon has provided us is the market level analysis that has enabled us to have these conversations. In terms of putting it to a grid like you see here and adding it all up, I mean, we can do that. We haven't done that yet.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that's the thing that you guys are interested in seeing.
Yeah, that's a great exercise for the advisory committee, for example.
Yes.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I think that's a great question. I would say the next 24 months, I know what the market's going to do the next 24 to 36 months, and I would say you could probably bank on that scale of influx over that period.
Oh, ultimately, the county approves permits, correct?
Yes.
Not the
or
cities.
town of Monument.
Okay.
So
it
two
just-
jurisdictions there.
And are there any capacity issues, to your knowledge, at the county to be able to approve this percentage quantity of growth?
This is my estimate, basically. No one outside of human service providing agencies do regional housing forecasting of this type. I'm kind of an odd duck. There's one big company in Denver called Metro Study that provides it to the builders so they can do a sales forecast. But for the most part, as far as a comprehensive assessment of what to expect, schools, library districts, human service providing agencies such as mental health agencies, and then hospitals and public health agencies are those who want that data. Transportation wants it, but no one does this kind of a consolidation other than schools mostly.
Thank you.
I see Vicky moving. This laptop may die, so I better speed up here. So basically, my forecast is that we'll pick up about 550 elementary kids, about 100 middle school kids, and about 50 high school kids, is what I'm forecasting. Now, Monument Academy has added their secondary building. They're recruiting and enrolling children going south down the Highway 83 corridor in the Falcon 49 and in north central El Paso County. And so their enrollment will only be fractional of Lewis Palmer 38 students. So there's not going to be this massive drain of students into Monument Academy out of our 2 high schools. There we go. They will be a mixture of District 38 kids and out-of-district children, and they'll probably enroll about 150 kids per grade and max out at a little over 600, and then that will be their stable enrollment in grades 9 through 12. As far as my forecast goes, I'm showing us growing in every grade. If you look at every grade in this forecast, you can see I'm showing a little bit more of a leveling of our enrollment, but we continue to have more children in high school just because that has been how our cohorts have rolled forward into high school. I'm forecasting that we'll grow by about 1.5% per year, and my bottom line estimates of 602, 106, and 62 for elementary in a K-6 grade configuration, middle school in a 7-8 grade configuration, and high school in 9-12 are shown right there in the bottom by 2029, which will come sooner than you think. That's essentially my forecast. At Bear Creek, I'm showing 2 sets of numbers here. This is really our primary enrollment challenge. We have historically said, well, what happens if we pull the 6th grade out? So I have the K through 6 numbers shown in blue and the K through 5 numbers shown in purple. And there you can see by 2023 we'll be in excess of our capacity of 900 at Bear Creek Elementary School. And I forget what the other 2 big elementaries in the state we have to surpass in order to be the biggest elementary school in the state. I forget who they are, but we may be on top of the pile by that point. Now, that's not to say that other states don't have extremely large elementary schools. On the Wasatch Front, from Ogden all the way down through the Jordan Valley and on south to Provo, there are a lot of huge elementary schools that are 850, 900 students. So in the Mountain West, it's not such an odd situation to have a school like Bear Creek, but in the state of Colorado, it's a little bit abnormal. At Lewis Palmer, we will also exceed our capacity a little bit as a result of the beach by Campbell Homes and some of the other infill properties that are in the Lewis Palmer Elementary attendance area, but it won't be by much. Our capacity is about 4.25, and we would be up to 440. If we cut to K5, we wind up with a bunch of empty seats, as you can see by the purple line that's down below. At Ray Kilmer, because of our one big development in that community, you can see our K-6 enrollment grows up above Kilmer's capacity of 375 to the tune of about 30 students. That's not the kind of emergency that you can't solve with a portable classroom or 2. But if we cut to K5, we would easily pull Kilmer down within its capacity. Palmer Lake, in either configuration, we are short of capacity, but we have early childhood programs at Palmer Lake, and that's an environment where we have preschool programs in our neighborhood schools, as we currently do at Bear Creek. So keep in mind that we have I guess, a hybridized or decentralized preschool model where we have preschools out in our neighborhood schools.
So our Palmer Lake preschool is located here, so we wouldn't have that necessarily affecting our Palmer Lake building.
Yep.
But I could see it affecting Kilmer.
So we've got some space in Palmer Lake. I hear anecdotally of a lot of young families being really, really attracted to that community and that school. I don't know if it will have much of a bump because most of the development out in that area comes in chunks of 5 or 8 new homes. And every year, less than 2% of the overall housing stock is new, and 98% of it is old. So something can be happening in the existing housing stock in the way of decline that drastically offsets a few new homes. So I don't expect much change in Palmer Lake. At the middle school level, that purple line shows to 7-8 trending, and you can see that if we stay 7-8 at Lewis Palmer Middle School, we stay below capacity because of some grade distribution effects, meaning we have some smaller grades moving in, but by 2027, 2028, we get the big grades coming out of Bear Creek start to exceed Lewis Palmer Middle School's capacity fairly drastically. Having walked through 5,000 schools in my career and looked at 5,000 school parking lots, that one is one of the best managed I've ever seen. It's also one of the busiest that I've ever seen. That school getting much larger, thankfully it won't go over 900. Lewis Palmer High School and Palmer Ridge High School all remain below their capacity and lose a little bit of enrollment, predominantly due to Monument Charter, because of Monument Charter's mixed market share, absorbing maybe 40% District 38 kids and the balance of the kids coming from Falcon 49, Academy 20, District 11, other area. I think we're even pulling kids in the Monument Academy out of Douglas County School District. So it's really a regional school. So that's my presentation. I have more work to do based on your questions. I'm delighted to continue to conduct this research. I think the land dedication fee in lieu, IGA and ordinance would be a really important thing for you to achieve before we see that big chunk of development move through the system, because that would be a missed opportunity to not at least be charging what our neighbors are charging for fee in lieu before all of that comes through the system.
So question on that, are you saying we're not getting 2,000 a lot?
We have an older ordinance that had kind of a nominal fee that was significantly
370 and change?
1,300, around about.
1,300, okay.
So we, just so you know, timeline, we have met both with the Home Builders Association as well as Town and Monument. We're anticipating that we can work to finalize what our proposal is. Keeping in mind, we are not the ones that set it. So we have the ability to influence here. We are not the final decision maker. But I think we're in a position, given the research that Shannon's provided us, as well as the market descriptors, et cetera, to have a revised fee that can be set as early as, I think our target would be January, February at the beginning of this upcoming calendar year.
Really?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're getting close.
Thank you.
And I think we can have a more detailed update available for you by January 11 at that work session.
Thank you.
Fun facts, the fee that we propose to assess is in the lower third of what other districts along the Front Range are charging, and that includes not just Cherry Creek and Douglas County and Boulder and St. Vrain, but Bennett and Wiggins and Highlands Alt and Eaton and Platteville. All of these communities that are very small, but they're growing very rapidly, and they're at the point in their history where they need to be buying land. And so their fees are up in that $2,000 range.
The fees from the county are consistent throughout all of the El Paso County school districts.
Unincorporated, yeah.
Unincorporated, yep.
Mm-hmm. That may be a harder effort, because it would involve more than just us, but I think we would be happy to lead the charge, so to speak. We have had some conversations with some surrounding districts in a more informal way, just to see if we can all organize and lobby together.
And how much does El Paso County pay cash in lieu of? It's
I don't have that off the top of my head. Do you know, Shannon? I'd have to look it up.
I don't, but I would be delighted to collect that for you and get it to you this week. And also, I might add that the lion's share of our development will be in incorporated areas.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's important.
Have that.
Yeah, I thought it was 371.
It's 3.
I can tell you what it was in 1985.
No, it's still the same. It's. Oh, where is it?
While she's looking that up, can I ask a clarification question on your graphs? Your gray lines are your capacity lines for each school.
Yes.
Are they programming capacity or building capacity?
I'm a program capacity guy, and I think I built those. And so they're not fire code, they're not an architect's style capacity. I believe those are program capacities because I developed them in consultation with the building principals when we built them. And those numbers are probably 6 years old. So if they deserve a revisit based on program changes or your comfort level, that's something that could be done. But I'm fairly convinced that those were well informed by how Lewis Palmer 38 does business from a programmatic standpoint. And that's kind of, when people hire me to do a capacity like Douglas County just did, it's all based upon master schedules and student-teacher ratio for kindergarten through 5th grade and taking taking art, music, and PE spaces offline. So I'm very much a program capacity person. Those lines are program capacity.
So county is 308.
Well done. That being said, Ms. Phillips, the numbers that we're used to seeing on our enrollment graphs may not be identical. I don't believe we're necessarily, they are in some cases, but I think in others maybe not. So just food for thought, and that's okay. That wasn't Shannon's doing, that was what was developed from a few years ago. So it would be worth making sure that we have up-to-date and consistent program capacity figures that we can reference.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. And maybe my fellow board members can correct me if I'm wrong, but I recall in the last year and a half hearing a presentation that there is an optimal capacity in a school that is not necessarily right at the gray line. It can be above or below it. So it's made me rethink some of these lines as an optimal point, as opposed to there's variance there for capacity that I don't know if there's a way to depict that, but could be helpful in the future in terms of how we're thinking about that. And I don't recall which presentation I learned that in.
I believe that was during some of our Grace Best conversations in the steering
Yes.
committee work that we had. So.
And it varies from there is optimization even at 104% of a building capacity at times.
There's a sweet spot where you get a full-time PE teacher, a full-time art teacher, full-time music, and then OT, PT, speech language pathologists, special ed teachers. All those people become less fractional. And generally, it's right around 3 round.
So I think it's helpful to have the conversation around not so much the numbers, which, the data is helpful, but how are we optimizing the learning for our students, and how are we optimizing our budget expenditures in terms of staffing?
One more question, if I may. So this is great data. Thank you. And
You're welcome.
We're at a point now where we're starting to look at some of these things, so it's very, very timely. When surveys are done, we know it's an art, not a science. There's also a degree of accuracy that typically is granted to the surveyors. What would you say, based on your experience and your knowledge and your work in this region, that degree of accuracy is for this report?
I lose about 1% a year. So most of my enrollment forecasting for staffing for the following year varies by not more than 1%. The following year would be 2, the following year would be 3.
So we just take it proportionally out 7 years. So we go from 1 to 7% in your analysis here.
I would say something to that effect, but this housing market has favored secondary age children for so long that it has a little bit of a built-in error associated with it. And the developments that are in with $500,000 price range housing, which are Willow Springs and Jackson Creek North, are hopefully going to break that trend and get elementary children in here. And so I'm kind of banking that based upon what they're telling me, their homes are going to be priced at. That's going to be a change agent for us in that regard.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you so much for your time.
You're most welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shannon. Safe travels.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
So we are now at agenda item C2.
So I believe we've got an update from our auditor, and he's going to be joining us by phone.
Okay. John Paul, good evening. It's Kitty here with the board. Can you hear me okay?
Hi, Kitty. Yes, can you hear me?
Are you guys able to hear me? Yes, we can. Okay, great. Okay, I do have the draft financials pulled up. Welcome to our meeting, John Paul. And thank you for getting this draft prepared for tonight. I appreciate that very much. Do you want me to?
Absolutely.
Do you want me to scroll through as you kind of introduce this document?
Sure. So I was planning on keeping things pretty high level. I know the board probably hasn't had too much of a chance to go through the document just yet. So I wasn't planning on going into too much detail unless there's specific areas that the board wants to review. I guess maybe to back up, my name is John Paul Le Chevalier again, and I'm with Clifton Larson Allen, or CLA, which is the accounting firm engaged to perform the district's financial statement audit. So at this point, I would say we're probably about probably over 90% completed with the audit. Still have a little bit left to do to wrap everything up, but did want to give you an update on the status of the audit so far, as well as review the draft of the financial statements. So in addition to being the auditors, the district also engages CLA to compile the annual financial statements, which is, so our responsibility is basically just putting all the information that we received from the district into the format that you see in the draft. So we're not doing most of, these calculations are coming from the district or from PARA, and we're putting it into the financial statements. So again, these are still in draft form, and that's been the case that, as we've presented in previous years, to be able to give the board a chance to review the draft, ask any questions or any discussion items prior to finalizing the financial statements, which we expect to do within the next couple of weeks or so. In terms of the timeline for the audit, we're similar to last year in terms of timeline and progress, which is a bit later than where the timing has been in previous years prior to that. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first is that there's been delays in the federal guidance that auditors are required to follow for auditing COVID relief funds. particularly really both the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. And so that's something that we were waiting for the federal government to release that guidance. That just came out a couple of days ago, so we do have that guidance now, and so we're following through on the audit steps that they require us to follow as it relates to the federal awards that are passed through the Colorado Department of Education, or CDE, to Lewis Palmer. So CDE hosts regular meetings for finance departments to attend, as well as auditors listen in as well. In their most recent meeting, they had a representative from the state auditor's office attend, and that representative encouraged most school districts to be filing audit extensions. The audit is due at the end of December, but based on the timing of when this guidance has come out, the auditor's office is expecting most districts to be filing extensions to have that completed probably shortly after the end of the year. But so it's not something that's happening just with Lewis Palmer, but it really is across the country and across Colorado as well. So it's a similar delay to what happened last year with the CARES Act. There was a similar delay. I believe it was right before Christmas last year that they released the federal guidance. So it's a little bit earlier this year, both under COVID relief funding, but with the change in administration, there's also changes in guidance from the CARES Act to the American Rescue Plan. We're having the same delay again this year. I'd say I'm optimistic that the delay won't happen again next year, but really hard to predict what the federal government's going to do. So the other portion or kind of reason as to why we're a little bit behind where we were prior to COVID is just some of the turnover that's happened with the finance department. So in discussing with Kitty, we did have a delayed start to the audit to allow the districts to put together all of the information that's needed for the audit. So we began in early November, which is a bit later than where we had started previously. And then there's also been some additional time working through some reconciliation issues, which are similar reconciliation issues that we've worked through the past couple of years. However, each year with some of the turnover, some of the institutional knowledge that's gained each year in working to improve some of those reconciling items, that kind of gets lost. And so that's been something that we've been working through each year. So those issues would be primarily in year-end adjustments, so not necessarily operational issues, but more things that are required specifically for preparation of the financial statements. So something that really would only be done once a year, such as property tax receivables and the related unavailable revenue, salary and benefit accruals, grant receivables, et cetera. So those are kind of the significant areas that we've been working through, and we have some recommendations for improvement for next year, similar to the recommendations that we've had the last couple of years. And so we'll provide those recommendations in our formal audit letter that'll be included in the January presentation. So that's kind of a status of the audit. In terms of the financial statements, like I mentioned at the beginning, I wasn't planning on going into too much detail on the financial statements themselves, especially since the information is a bit dated at this point. We are looking at June 2021, the end of the district's fiscal year. There was one notable change in the way that the financial statements are presented, which reclassifies the student activity fund from what was previously known as a fiduciary fund to now being referred to as a special revenue fund. What this means is that the student activity fund is combined in with all of the other activity of the district. So previously it was considered to be kind of its own separate presentation, and now it's combined in. You'd include that with your budget information. So it really just gets presented alongside all of the other activity. That's a nationwide change in governmental accounting standards that's resulted, it changed the guidance for fiduciary funds And so almost every school district that presented a fiduciary fund for student activities has had this same change over the last year, or basically when this standard was implemented. So that's one change. Overall, while it's significant in the accounting world, for the board, probably not all that significant of a change in the way that the financial statements are set up. The other thing in terms of changes to financial statements is really for next year, but just wanted to make the board aware that there is a significant change coming relating to leases that's expected to, depending on this, each individual school district or government, it depends on how much time and effort it will take to implement, but it's something that most governments are taking a long look at as something that's going to require a significant amount of time, effort, cost potentially to put together the required information for including leases on the financial statement. So just something to be aware of that your finance department will be working through, not for this year, but for next year, and that will be a significant change that we'll discuss again next year. In terms of the financial statements themselves, you can see the basic financial statements presented beginning on actual page 1, so past the Roman numeral section. If you look on page 2, you can see the change in net position line has 26.4 million, which would be an increase or a strengthening of the financial position of the district on the full accrual basis. This includes pension information, which accounts for almost the entirety of that change. So once you basically back out the pension-related information, it's a pretty similar financial position of the district last year compared to this year. If you look on page 5, you'll see that the net change in fund balances is just shy of 8.3 million, which seems like a very significant increase in financial position compared to last year. But one thing to keep in mind is that within this, there is capital lease that the district was involved in at the very end of June. And so there's 7.4 million in cash that's received relating to that capital lease that's included in that change in fund balance. So that's not free money, obviously. That's something that needs to be, will have to be paid back through the terms of the lease. But in terms of this set of financial statements, that's short-term focused and doesn't show those long-term assets, or sorry, long-term liabilities. This would be an increase. So once you back that out, it is a slight strengthening of financial position, but again, pretty comparable with the previous year when looking at the end of the district's fiscal year. So otherwise, as similar to previous years, all of the pension information is included within the financial statement, so that does take up, it's probably about 20 pages or so within the footnotes, so won't cover that in too much detail. I know we've spent time on that, and we can kind of go into that a little bit more when the final financial statements are issued. But again, just wanted to give an update on the status of the audit, as well as kind of present a little bit on the document itself. I don't know if there's any questions, so I'd be happy to answer them at this point. Otherwise, again, I realized that there wasn't too much time to review the document prior to this meeting, so if there's any other questions afterwards, I'd be happy to answer any follow-up.
One quick question. What was the timeline again for this preliminary versus where it'll be more solid? Is that did he say January?
Sure. So we are hoping to have our audit completed by the end of December. With some of the, again, the recently released federal guidance, we're still preliminary looking at whether that's going to be the end of December or early January, but early January would be kind of the latest that we're expecting to have everything finalized and completed.
Thanks.
And then it will be part
So
of
at this point, sorry.
No, that's okay, John Paul. I was just going to make mention that this will be formally up for board approval at the January 24th meeting.
Okay.
But we will have the more updated preliminary draft available as soon as it's complete.
Thank you. That was going to be my next question. That since this is a lot to regurgitate and go through, having a little bit more time and opportunity to go through it
Yes.
before we vote on it.
Yes.
Perfect.
That is what we're aiming for.
So a couple quick questions, just in terms of clarification. Is the rationale behind performing this audit compliance?
Who are you asking that to, Mr. Schwartz?
Kitty or John Paul?
John Paul, are you able to hear the question?
Sorry, I was just going to ask. I'm not able to. I could hear that something was being asked, but it was muffled.
Our board member, Ron Schwartz, would like to know if the purpose of an audit in this respect is for compliance or something else.
Sure. So the district is required by Colorado statute, which is similar really to everywhere across the country, to have an annual financial statement audit completed. There are two portions of that. There's the financial statements, which are presented today, and then there's also what's referred to as the single audit, which is an audit over federal awards, which is required because the district receives over $750,000 in federal awards each year. So there is a compliance piece to each of or to both parts. You are required to have an annual financial statement audit, and you're required by the federal government to have this single audit based on the amount received during the year. The other purpose would be financial transparency for the financial statements, to be able to see either for lending institutions, for citizens, for you as the board, to be able to see the annual financial information. Though again, there is kind of a trade-off between the timeliness of it, which obviously is past the monthly financial information, which is not following all of the accounting standards, so that can be put together on a monthly basis. But the annual financial statements do make sure that everything is in line. One thing to keep in mind is that while we do review internal controls, make sure that those are in place, our audit is not specifically reviewing for fraud. So if there was any indication that there was fraud happening or something came to our attention as part of the testing, that would be brought up immediately to the board as a concern. But it's not something that our audit procedures are intentionally designed to be finding or detecting. So that is a common misconception, so something that I wanted to mention at this point, that we're not intentionally, we're not looking for fraud, but if something were to come to our attention, we would bring that to you immediately.
Okay, thank you for the detail. Follow-up question, and no need for that much detail on the answer, please. Where does the district stand in terms of the quality of the data in the audit, both from a potential creditor standpoint and from an integrity standpoint, just on a 1 to 10 scale?
Were you unable to hear that question, John Paul?
Yeah, would you be able to repeat it for me, please?
So on a scale of 1 to 10, Mr. Schwartz would like to know how the audit feels about the integrity of the data
And for potential lenders and creditors.
And what lenders or creditors how they would rank that on a scale of 1 to 10.
And 10 would be most credible, right?
Correct. Thank you.
Sure. So at this point, again, we do have the last bit of the audit to complete, but we do anticipate at this point issuing an unmodified or a clean audit opinion, which means that we're saying with reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. And that's going to be the same level of audit opinion that you'd expect from any audit firm or any type of organization that's receiving a financial statement audit. And so there is a level of materiality that goes into the financial statements in terms of making sure those numbers are correct. So it's not, if things are off by a couple of dollars, there's rounding that happens within the financial statements, but we're saying that materially these numbers can be relied on as being accurate based on the results of our audit testing and procedures performed. In terms of what information lenders are looking at, that's going to be really kind of outside of the scope of the audit in terms of what they typically look for. I know I've had a couple of conversations with S&P relating to charter schools and some of the things, questions that they have on the format of government financial statements. And typically they are looking to back out that pension information, kind of like I had mentioned, discussing that long-term view and the majority of that increase in net position relating to pensions. So I know that that is an area that they've been focusing in on as kind of excluding a lot of that and determining their ratings. But otherwise, there's not a whole lot that I could kind of comment on in terms of the impact to their ratings for the district.
Thank you very much.
No more questions.
Thank you.
Okay, well, John Paul, thank you so much for being here tonight. I appreciate it. I think we have reached the end of the question session.
Yep, thank you. I appreciate the time, and again, we'll look forward to presenting the final drafts in the January meeting, and any further discussion we can have at that point. Or if in the meantime anything comes up, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night. I also want to point out that if anybody else has any questions also or want to, if you go to our website and under the big old financial transparency tab, it shows everything from grant programs to our audits to everything you could need and more is right there.
Good reminder.
So I think we can segue directly
great.
into our next financial planning and analysis.
So there's nothing really unusual either in the November monthly reports, but are there any questions on those tonight? I did update the student counts with the most recent numbers that we have from the December count.
Anything we should be concerned about?
I don't think so.
Teresa was making fun of me because I was comparing the numbers you put to last year's report with red ink. It was good, thanks. Just lighten up.
I found the red ink concerning.
Especially,
Due diligence, Miss Upchurch.
especially when you're dealing with a CPA.
So the next, I'm sorry, are we ready for the next item?
Yeah, the mill levy certification. We can move on to that unless anybody has any other questions.
That is, there's just very slight changes from the last time this was presented, I think at the work session, the last work session we had. Just tweaked it a little bit because we had the final assessment come in from the county, so just adjusted slightly for those numbers. And that is...
Is that represented in green?
Pardon me?
Is that what's represented in green?
I'm not sure what
There's
you're
a
looking
green
at.
bar on
1B.
line 1B. I think that's not what it's limited to, Ms. Phillips. I
Yeah.
think there was a couple other.
That comes from the state with that highlight on it. I don't know exactly why.
So can you walk us through what were the changes?
Yes. So this 696, the assessed value, went up slightly from the original estimate from the county's assessor's office. So then we back into these mill levy numbers to get a percentage needed to meet that obligation. So for example, the bond redemption fund number 9.434 mils is what's needed to generate the amount of funds to pay off or to pay the principal and interest for the current year. And likewise on the mill levy override, we back into that number to reach the $4 million that's been approved in the mill levy override. So it's really primarily the 696 drives the mill calculation.
And how does the new state law, where we have to be at a minimum of 27 mills?
So
How
that
many
you
years?
can see, if you're looking at this document, they have the 27 and then they show the tax credit backing out. So last year we were at 23.164. We are required to raise by at least 1 mil until we reach that 27.
Increased by 1 mil per year.
Per year, yes.
So we still have to go 3 more years to do this,
Right.
to reach compliance, state
That's
law.
correct, yeah. Some districts are a lot higher than that, or a lot lower, rather, so they need a lot more years to reach the 27.
Any additional questions or comments? So I'd like to make a motion to approve the resolution certifying the 2022 Lewis Palmer School District 38 mill levy as presented and attached to the minutes of this meeting.
Second.
Ms. Wood?
Aye.
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 And that brings us to a Board Priority 5 update.
Thank you, Ms.
Mr. Belcher, and
Overton.
thank you, Ms. Overton. We appreciate your efforts, especially with regard to the audit.
Folks. 2 microphones. It might be a little too much for me. All right. So, excited to be here tonight with you guys. I just wanted to start by sharing my thanks and appreciation to you all for 2 things. First, for being fantastic brand ambassadors for D38. And then the second is for taking time in November to help out with our important communication work. So thank you all for that. Moving into a Priority 5 update, starting with a summary of what we'll talk about here this evening. D38 is in a strong position to refresh our brand. With key stakeholders, we have an identifiable brand, but a refresh will allow for modernization and will allow us to continue growing our reach. We will leverage this updated branding as we bridge out into a new marketing and communications push. This will allow us to define and explain who we are and what we do. Our work is guided by our strategic plan, for which we've also identified and finalized branding and language. So without further ado, excited to present the refreshed D38 logo. Digging into that logo a little bit, it preserves our history, so you'll notice some identifiable characteristics in there. It moves the mountains down just a little bit. It moves the star to shooting above the mountains, and it puts D38 and its full name at the heart of the logo. In that way, it honors our brand and our colors, and it's formatted for maximum usage, whether that's as a sticker, a logo, well, it is a logo, but a icon on your website, social media icon, etc. So excited to roll that out. As we do push that out, we see this as a multi-year process. We will start right now utilizing it digitally, as you'll see in this branded PowerPoint presentation. But it will take probably a year to replace signage in our buildings and in other locations. The refresh is going to accompany a communications and marketing push, which will commence in January, and the goal is to help stakeholders associate our new brand with our refreshed brand with the district, among other things. So before we dig into our marketing and communications push, I wanted to share some insights from our audience work in November. As you all know, we identified several key groups to home in on. So for students, and I should also note that this isn't comprehensive as an update on what we did together. However, this is targeting actionable insights as we move forward. So with students, they have pride in our system and our traditions of success. They realize our offerings and innovative programs present unique opportunities. When communicating with them, we should reinforce these strengths and uplift messages of trust and support. Our parents are engaged stakeholders, and they value D38 and what we present as we invest in their children. While communicating with this group, we should define and showcase our world-class education and help them absorb our message and the unique opportunities available to them. Our staff strive to be supported within their professional communities, and they have a deep passion for their craft and their students. While communicating with this group, we should continue to express that we hear and we are working on their behalf while showing our appreciation for them. For the extended community group, which we all focused in on, we identified that they do feel that we have valuable teachers, and as a system, we provide a necessary service. And when communicating with them, we should do our best to relate our success and the success of our students to the future success of our nation, region, and convey that we are trustworthy and transparent. So now that we've talked a little bit about our audiences, let's dig into that communication to marketing push. We will be in this campaign or push, as I'm calling it, for a full year, at which time we'll reevaluate. And we will leverage print, terrestrial, and digital tactics to share our messages and improve our value proposition with stakeholders. We'll execute on both owned and paid tactics to effectively expand our reach beyond what it would normally be and increase information absorption. Additionally, we'll navigate a tight budget by shifting some print initiatives that we previously undertook and take some of that in-house. And we will spend deftly on digital platforms. So talking a little bit about that.
Question, I think, Mr. Belcher.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted, what is a terrestrial tactic?
Sure. I got that question a little earlier today, too. So terrestrial could be identified as traditional TV or radio you might hear in your car, as opposed to streaming over-the-top TV or streaming radio such as Pandora.
Thank you. And then also navigating a tight budget. Can you, what is the, I don't know if you can give me a percentage or some number to relatively compare to other entities or other school districts or other educational entities. What percentage are you working with?
Sure. I'd be happy to pull those numbers. I don't have them at my fingertips. But,
okay. Just for future.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have a question too.
Sure.
Okay, so point 1 says leverage print, and then point 3 says shifting print initiatives to in-house format. Can you?
Absolutely. So we still want to leverage print. As identified in our extended community group, they choose to they prefer to be communicated with via print, whether that's an ad in a newspaper or what I'm about to talk about, which is a new initiative to create an in-house, not magazine, but an in-house informative piece that would be received by all people in our district 4 times a year, so potentially quarterly.
Okay.
Excellent. So zooming in on that a little bit, I thought you might like that. This is conceived of as the D38 dispatch to provide updates in a print format, but to navigate around that tight budget, we conceive of this as a smaller piece that will have some updates and will also push people to a digital platform where an update will be curated for them. So more to come on this as we branch out in January, but excited to roll this out. As mentioned, we do want to continue advertising in some of our local newspapers, and this is an example of a new branded print ad. Again, digital is going to be important for us, so this is an example of a Facebook and an Instagram sponsored post. And then homing back in, now that I've showed just some draft examples, we'll talk about messages in our tagline. So you'll remember some of these from our work in November, but our messaging is around D38 providing a world-class education, serving every student every day, being transparent and being good stewards of public capital, acting in accordance with policy and our long-range strategic plan. Our headline, which we will seek to work in many locations, is every student, every day. And we've landed on what I think is a pretty nifty tagline of D38 Elevates. So it kind of rolls off the tongue there. All right. Now, something close to the board's heart is the strategic plan and our branding around it. This is a plan to elevate a world-class district and support every student every day. So, zooming in on this a little bit, we've played with a couple different designs, and I think we've landed on a good design that takes elements of our brand and helps make the strategic plan absorbable. You'll find the D38 star connected with each point to a strategic plan priority, and you'll find ties to our logo in the hexagonal shape that the star is nested within. Moving on, elements like this will be rolled out in our buildings as we continue to help our people connect with the plan. This is just one example. I think we have a concept for a larger piece that would be printed in a more final form for our buildings. And zooming a little bit more in on deploying that strategic plan branding within our buildings. Again, it'll take some time, but we'll be replacing our old materials in all of our buildings. We'll be building a website in the very near future dedicated to exploring elements of our strategic plan and the brand around it. And the website will have connections to stories that are related back to our strategic plan priorities. Finally, about those stories, we'll be publishing them, and our news website will be navigable around each of those strategic plan points. So, any questions for me?
No, I like this. Logo's great. I like what you did with the strategic plan. Wonderful job.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, budget. So we're working on a tight budget.
Sure.
And when we look at all these strategies, how does this affect our return on investment and what we do and don't have to work on, like places that we're cutting or places that we're shifting?
Sure. So I'll start with what we're shifting just a little bit. We're going to pare back on some of our larger print initiatives, and a couple examples of those are relocation guides, where we would put a full-page ad in a relocation guide, saving some of those dollars to reimagine how we're spending to impact and get our message absorbed by those who are in our stakeholder groups. So zooming back a little bit into our return on investment, we don't know it quite yet. We'll be monitoring our analytics, and we'll be monitoring our website. We hope to see it bear out in, I think I said this last time, we hope to see it bear out as people vote, as students enroll in our district, and hopefully we'll also see it bear out in our analytics. So, is there any additional point I can add there?
No, actually, I was just curious how you were going to navigate. So, thanks.
Sure.
You did.
Yeah.
I have two things.
Sure.
I don't know how to classify them. D38 providing a world-class education, and what is the conversation that is connecting that with our profile of a graduate?
That's a good question.
Did you want to take a stab at that
Why don't
question?
you go first? We had a good conversation about this earlier.
Our portrait of a graduate connected to world class. So I think we want to continue defining what world class is. And I think the portrait of a graduate is one way to do that and show that, and Dr. Summers, you put it so eloquently earlier, so I don't want to steal.
Well, I think there's a few big buckets around it, right? We understand that our students are competing for careers, for future life at a, certainly at a broader level than just the local community that they're growing up in. So what we recognize is the value proposition in regards to how prepared are they for success beyond just their time here with us, and what are the global implications of that. I think in terms of how that ties to our profile of a graduate, I think once we hear and share more of that feedback that's been accumulated from those interviews that our students have had, I think you will see some more natural connections. I think the other thing is recognizing that it's a competitive market that we're working in, right? So what distinguishes D38 compared to other districts that are surrounding us? But beyond even just the competition landscape, we want to be the very best in every possible arena or sphere of what education is representing, and certainly we want to see that in results, but I think we also want to see that in terms of the process that's leveraged in that. And as I say that, that's beyond even just a student frame, right? I think that's an opportunity to discuss what that means from a staff perspective, certainly, as well as how our families feel about the system as well. So when we talk about those things, we expect that people are holding us to a high bar in that process as well. So I think as we deepen more of that understanding and what those definitions mean and what it represents, I'd love for a lot of our students, our staff, our families to be able to speak to, here's what it means to be part of a world-class educational organization. Does that help answer that question?
Yeah, it does. And I would just like perhaps to add one other additional thought, that I would posit that if you are providing a world-class education for our younger generation, and even if for a period of time they go elsewhere, if we have a world-class environment in this community, some of them will come back. And that's a very positive feedback loop. So that's partly why I was wanting to hear how that's being articulated, and how can we incorporate a larger lens on that than just you know, up to a certain age or a certain educational developmental level. And then I also just wanted to bring up a finer point, and it might sound very odd, but when we moved here in 2006, I remember a conversation about whether Lewis Palmer is hyphenated or not.
Is hyphenated.
Can you clarify why, just
If it
for
ever hasn't
general
been.
knowledge, why is Lewis Palmer hyphenated? And
I've seen people do it both ways, but our style guide says it's hyphenated. So
do we know why?
My understanding is that it represented the consolidation of two districts into one. So at a very fundamental level, it's about bridging both the Lewis and the Palmer aspect of how the district originated.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. I just wanted to help those who might be new to the district understand why Lewis Palmer is indeed hyphenated.
For the record, beyond what the style guide suggests, because I was told that, I sort of took that to be true. So I could certainly express that as, well, this is what I heard. However, I don't want rumor or innuendo to be the reason why.
Might I suggest we spend time on this during a working session?
We absolutely are happy to do so.
I was hesitant to bring up a fine point, but it is very, very important in some aspects of our community, so I just wanted to.
Yeah, I've also been told if you don't, you're in big trouble. So
It's worth it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is a really replete summary of our working session and some conversations I know we've had, because I'm assigned to that communication goal along with Ms. Upchurch. So thank you very much.
thank you.
Can I add one more thing that's not part of the presentation, Mark? This is not to steal any of your thunder. However, I just wanted to make mention that in an effort to continue with our communications and our marketing push, we also talked at length in the work session around the concept of listening. And we are prepared to share more of the outline, more of the thinking in preparation for what I'm going to, I believe, start referring to as board listening sessions as we launch into the new year. So that will be a topic for further examination at the January 11th work session. And we're excited to dive deeper into the role that listening will play in this comprehensive communications effort.
And Mark, I want to say my appreciation for the work session that you led. That exercise was a great exercise. It was the last two work sessions where we've been working, really getting to work, have been great. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for helping maximize that opportunity. So.
May I make one summary comment?
Yes, please.
This is great on a lot of levels, but the most important level is its innovation. You don't rest on your laurels even though the district is doing well. You plow forward, you stay ahead of the curve, and you guys are doing that. And that matters deeply because we do compete. But if we set the playing field, we're ahead of the game. And that's what you're doing here.
Hashtag D38 elevates. That's our new tagline. Thank you for that affirmation.
Yeah, but you're building the messages designed to be absorbed by the various constituents instead of throwing something out there and seeing what sticks, right? You have a metric-based model, and we are interested in power listening to our stakeholders and our customers, and that's what matters.
Appreciate that.
So, to agenda item C6, policy update.
So I'd like to invite us, and he's going to just do a quick summary overview of our two policies for first reading this particular meeting. So we're looking specifically at JFBA and JFBB. And Mr. Frampton, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir.
Great. Thank you. Good evening. If you look at the two policies in front of you, you'll notice that we've color-coded them into 3 different colors. That was the easiest way to sort out exactly what we're looking at as far as recommendations of changes, what CASB is recommending to change, and what's existing in our current policy that is different from CASB. The primary reason we're sitting here this evening is CASB did make some recommendations for changes based on change of law, and you'll see that those changes are going to be highlighted in pink. And you're going to hear from us that we recommend adopting all of CASB's changes as they do align with updates in law. You're also going to hear us recommend that we're recommending that we keep the existing Lewis Palmer language in the policy because it's specific to some procedures that we do here in Lewis Palmer, and we want to continue with those practices. I want to pay more attention to the lettering in red, which are recommendations to the practice of open enrollment for both inter and intra-district applications, because we're talking about making a subtle but important change in our practices. The first piece that we're recommending changing is that we're moving from having an open enrollment window and an appeals window, which is what we currently have, to a round 1 and round 2 window. A lot of people are questioning what they're appealing when they make an appeals process, and it's not as clear as defining 2 different roles. The second thing I want to point to your attention is that we are creating a much more clearly defined priority list. So as we heard, our numbers might be going up in the future, and we might be running into times in which we would have to deny open enrollments. So we delineate the 5 priority groups in order, so it becomes much more clear on whom we would be able to accept if in fact we're looking at reaching capacity in certain grade levels in our school. One thing we're going to recommend is that we still continue to give priority, in-district level priority, to our staff and their students or their children. So that would be one of those benefits that we're giving to our employees. Any questions, thoughts, feedback?
Is this modeled on another system?
It is. We did some research. We took a look at Jefferson County specifically, and this is in alignment to what our neighbors are doing, but specifically Jefferson County.
And based on what you know, you don't feel there are any gaps or things that we might run into that we wouldn't know?
I think this is a much more clear than our existing policy. If you were to take a look at some other districts, including Jefferson County, they get even more in detail. So we didn't get into the same level of detail as some other districts, but based on where we were beginning and where we want to go, this is adding considerable clarity. I think if we start reaching into a point in which we're seeing high capacity in schools where denial is going to become more the norm, we may want to reconsider this policy at that time and look at adding more detail. But as of now, that doesn't, I don't think that would be necessary.
And this applies during a choice window for the upcoming academic year.
That is correct. That's why
And
there's some urgency to
it doesn't cover enrollment or transfers during that current year.
Correct.
Okay.
And open enrollment, choice enrollment opens February, right?
January.
January.
So
Okay.
if we are moving forward with our second reading and subsequent approval, what would essentially happen is we would treat our first round, which we aren't really calling it first round right now, as we already would treat it from January through first week of February, roughly. Those dates would be varied year over year based on the way that the calendar is constructed. So for example, it starts January 3rd when we come back in beginning of this year. I think it's February 5th, 6th, maybe the first week, end of the first week of February would be the end. What we would propose then is that the implementation of the round 2 window commences following the completion of that first round. Even though we don't call it that right now, that's essentially almost how we're treating it. So your chances of being accepted in the first round window are significantly improved, if you will, compared to if you wait much longer and you're not really getting your paperwork in well into the school year. There's a chance that we're not going to be in a position where we can grant that request based on space availability and some of these other factors. So that's essentially how we would treat this, is that it would be effective upon approval, but since we're in the middle of a choice enrollment process at this point, that's the way we would be translating this. I hope that makes sense.
Yes. I also want to say that I appreciate that you're putting the matrix when we're discussing these as part of the board docs, because it's easier just to jump on there and reference it and see, for example, when it says CASB review, recommended and reviewed, that's also, it says right here on the policy, based on CRS 22-36-107, for example.
We received some really good feedback from our board, and so we put it into practice right away. Thank you, Vicki, for doing that. The other thing, just a quick side note that I'll mention relating to the policy matrix, is that we are in an ongoing process of reviewing policies that may not warrant any particular change. While that has not appeared to date in the matrix, moving into January, that would be our intention, is to include those reviewed policies as well, just with a quick summary as to we recommend that we maintain our present course and there's no change needed. So you'll see more of those policies popping up. So it may look like there's several on the matrix, because eventually there's going to be all of them, if that makes sense.
I also appreciate the color coding. It's the easy reference.
Yeah, when we were dealing with 3 different versions of it, that was the only way I think we could communicate it. So,
Thank you. I like it.
Anything else?
Thank you, Mr. Frampton.
Thank you, Mr. Frampton.
Since that was the first reading, there's no vote or approval needed for that item, so we'll move on to agenda item C7, considering and approving the proposed district calendars.
So Mrs. Wetstein is joining us with a little more context as requested during our work session, and in addition to that, the attached calendars are also included in your packet. Mrs. Wetstein.
Good evening. I'm here this evening to ask you to approve the calendar for the upcoming year and then to provide preliminary approval for the following year, the 2023-2024 school calendar. And as requested, I have just a little bit more information in slide format to share with you this evening. This agenda item aligns with 3 of our board priorities. Priority 2, providing a world-class education for every student every day. And priority 3, valuing our people and committing to continuous improvement and growth, as well as building strong relationships through effective communication. Our calendar review process included several district leadership representatives. The committee was led by Miss Alicia Welch, our elementary principal at Prairie Winds, and we brought together learning services representatives as well as human resources and our enrollment office. And then Alicia worked very diligently with each of the school principals on behalf of all of their staff to get input into the current calendars that you have presented in front of you. We reviewed student and staff contact days over the past 10 school years to see how those might have changed over the years. We also analyzed and compared school district calendars across our region to determine how our student and staff contact days compared annually. And then we, as I mentioned, solicited feedback from principals on behalf of their school faculty. And here were the outcomes. We are proposing that the district continue to provide a 163 student contact day calendar at the elementary level, 167 at the middle school, and 169. These contact hours and days meet our state requirements to ensure that we are providing adequate educational opportunities for all of our students. In alignment with priority 3, we do have significant days built into our calendar for staff development and training, as well as time for teachers to prepare for things like report card preparation, as well as parent conferences. And in alignment with priority 5, we would like to publish an approved calendar for the upcoming school year and also publish the preliminary calendar so that we can support family planning well into the upcoming school year. What questions may I answer for you?
I have a question that I had not thought of at the last work session that some teachers had asked me before. When the principals came together and looked at this, for the future, would it be possible to include more staff, like teachers, building level teachers in the committee, the group that comes together, just to get a teacher input?
Yes, that's something that we did actually consider and acknowledge that with the timeline that we were working with, that would be something we would certainly want to consider moving forward. And since we are asking for preliminary approval for the upcoming school year, we could certainly review that with a group of staff to see if there are any minor changes that need to be made to that calendar. And then moving forward longer term, we did discuss establishing a broader voice in the calendar discussion.
Tonight we're voting for next year's school calendar, but the one after that is preliminary and there's room for tweaking.
Yes, I would suggest that tweaks that would be made would be minor because our families do depend on some consistency in planning vacations and those kinds of things, but potentially there could be room for some tweaking for that upcoming school year calendar.
Is there anything that was left on the table that we couldn't get done with this calendar? Or do you feel comfortable it's comprehensive?
I feel it's comprehensive and it is consistent. When we looked back over the course of many years, it was upholding what the expectations had been of our community over the past 10 years.
Does it give you the agility to innovate?
One thing we learned when we did a comparison of surrounding districts is that we have significantly more time for teachers to attend training and to collaborate with one another. And I think that speaks to your question about teachers having that time without students that they can learn and grow from each other. And that, in my opinion, helps support innovation.
Thank you.
So something that comes to mind that you focus, that your question, for example, May, it used to be that the first week in May, Teacher Appreciation Week, was always, we always had to plan, I recall this, that we had to plan around 4 days because the Friday would be a teacher work day so that elementary teachers, since they don't use Infinite Campus, have that more time to prepare for their report cards and their end of year, getting everything cleaned up before the kiddos are out of school a week and a half or a week later. And we don't do that anymore, and I didn't know if there's a reason why, but it might be something that teachers would want some input into.
I don't know the answer to that and why that decision was made, but we could certainly take a look at that.
Yeah, I don't have really anything beyond that to comment on. I think one of the challenges anytime we're looking at the year as a whole, alongside some of those nuances within the year, we just have to be very measured, right? Because anytime you're taking something or taking something off or putting something back in, there's a ripple effect. So that's just my one kind of disclaimer as we're considering some of those dynamics for this year as well as for future years. But I appreciate the comment around that.
I just wanted to be mindful for especially our elementary school teachers.
Yes, and then there's always the snow days, and that plays a role in everything that we do as well. However, and this is not wood, maybe this is, we've not yet had one, so for this year. So we'll see how long that plays out in the second semester, but some of those are dynamics that we also have to attend to in terms of total number of days, instructional hours, et cetera.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the final 2022 to 23 district calendar and the preliminary 2023 to 2024 district calendar as presented.
I'll second that motion.
Ms. Wood?
Aye.
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 Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you, Amber.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have now moved to agenda item C8, approval of the consent agenda.
So Casey, Teresa, I had asked some questions, but I wanted to just go ahead and pull it out to visit it a little bit, and that's number 5. For clarification.
Yeah, let me also invite Amber back up. Short trip
It'll be
back
short.
and forth.
I promise.
Extra steps.
So, do you want to frame the question, or do you want me
Yeah.
to just?
So for other boards, for the rest of my fellow board members to know, and anybody else who's watching, this is a grant and it's for
It's
the
not,
tool that.
sorry, it's not a grant.
Oh.
Let me, that was my misrepresentation earlier. So let me jump in and help understand what this is. So every year we are asked to sign an assurance document which speaks to, in this particular case, the use of the Early Literacy Assessment Tool project, which is being referred to as Amplify because that is the vendor, and the tool is the assessment that is utilized that is now referred to as Acadience, formerly known as DIBELS. So this specifically assesses students in the early grades, kindergarten through 2, although at 3, thank you. So this essentially assures, because this is a resource that is made available to us from the state of Colorado, CDE specifically, for free. And as a result, the assurances document speaks to ultimately how the data is being utilized, how it is being shared. And I think, Ms. Upchurch, if I understood your question correctly, it was a inquiry to make sure that data is being protected from our students as this tool is being utilized. Did I do a good job of summarizing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the document speaks to what the use of that data will be. The essence of it, it's data that is held certainly by our district, and then it is used to norm to ensure that as we're keeping track of individual student progress, that there are also reports speaking to statewide level progress or any student for that matter that is utilizing the tool. Did I miss anything, Ms. Wetstein?
I'll just add that anytime we share data with any type of vendor, we have an agreement that's a data privacy agreement, and that is a requirement. So that is in place with Amplify, and we do use Amplify as a vendor for other curriculum and assessments as well.
So this basically replace Dibbles.
Yeah,
It's the same thing, they just changed the name of it.
Yep. And I think the point of the tool is primarily to assess our students' progress through their reading performance over the course of early childhood years. So it certainly presents really quality data to allow us to know exactly not only how our individual students are doing, but how groups of students across multiple cohorts or grade levels are also performing. And the fact that it is made available to us for free is also a nice perk.
We are required to assess the students. So if we did not participate in this ELAT project, we would have to purchase the assessment on our own and still provide the data to CDE.
And we're protecting our students' information.
That is a top priority for us in multiple contexts. This just is another example of such.
Thanks.
And can we use this for our K through 5 literacy program anyways, as a metric?
We don't typically, our schools purchase, the state provides us the tool at no charge for kindergarten through 3rd grade, and then we are obligated to consistently use it with those students. Our schools do choose to purchase on their own extra seats for 4th and 5th graders who may not be reading at grade level as a way to monitor their progress, but we don't do it district-wide. We use other assessments such as our NWEA MAP assessment beyond 3rd grade to monitor that.
Thanks. Does that help?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Amber.
Thanks.
Thank you, Teresa. Sure.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Aye.
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 And with that, our meeting is adjourned.
Happy holidays and see you. Yeah.
Thank you.
See you in 2022. All right, I'm going to give you a bunch.
That's all good.